College football, she's a-changing right now, and you can argue for the better or for the worse. You can be totally indifferent on this, but for a long time, here's one thing we did know. For a long time, if you fired your head coach and then you cleaned out your coaching staff, there were a couple of things that you could pretty well take for certain, and one of them was you've got a rebuild on your hands. With limited exceptions, you're going to have a rebuild on your hands. You've certainly got to get a head coach, and that's a crapshoot in and of itself. And then he's got to go, and he's got to get a great staff in, and there's no real good time to do it because you've got a firing happening right in the middle of recruiting season. And so you got all that mess. And then once you get everything in, and everything's settled and you know who the head coach is, and you got your coordinators, and you got your strength and conditioning coach, and all your position coaches filled out, then you got to worry about the entire premise that was the reason for firing the previous staff to begin with. And it's probably that the program wasn't in a good spot. LSU football was not in a good spot. They fired Ed, they brought in Brian Kelly. USC football was not in a good spot. They fired Clay Helton, they brought in Lincoln Riley. What that used to mean is, even if you're excited about the hire, once upon a time, Alabama hired Nick Saban. They still went 7-6 the next year. It used to mean that no matter how big a grand slam you hit in the hiring process, it's going to be a little bit of a rebuild. So you're going to have some patience, and we're going to have to turn this thing over. And here's the important part. We're going to have to turn over, and it's not going to happen overnight. Things have changed. Things have changed drastically and violently over the past, I'm going to speak in terms of months, 24 to 36 months. It's really changed drastically. I'm not here to debate tonight whether I like where we are. I'm not really here to try and kind of prod you into debating whether you like what the transfer portal is doing or you don't like what the transfer portal is doing. Let's put those opinions to the side because we've got plenty of time in what some casuals would call the off-season to debate that. What I want to do tonight is just accept the facts for what they are, and then I want to ask you, do you get what's going on right now? Look around. Look at what LSU and USC specifically are doing. But you could throw Ole Miss in here. You could throw a number of programs in here. But I'm talking about programs that have made coaching changes. Kiffin was at Ole Miss last year. Lincoln Riley was not in Los Angeles 6 months ago. Brian Kelly was not in Baton Rouge 6 months ago. And now they're there. And what used to mean, take some time, be patient, we got to rebuild, has totally been turned on its ear. These numbers are staggering. I know a lot of you are in tune. If you've been keeping up with the day-to-day of college football, you're in tune with the fact that LSU's made a lot of moves in the portal. Certainly, we are constantly watching USC, even up to and including this moment, because we're trying to find out if Caleb Williams is going to Southern Cal and when is it going to happen. But we don't have to wait for that. If you look at the transfer portal rankings, which are on your screen if you're watching on YouTube, LSU and USC are 1-2 there. Ole Miss has knocked it out of the park. They may not be done. Arkansas, certainly not done. They've made another addition as recently as today that we're going to talk about a little bit later on. Guys, I'm going to hit you with some numbers here. I want you to think about telling your 1997 self this, or tell your 2007 self this. Imagine me telling you USC is going to replace their head coach. That's not breaking news. I mean, USC's done that before. You know they're going to do it again. But I want you to think about the numbers I'm about to hit you with. Think about what's possible now because of the transfer portal. Do you know that since Lincoln Riley took over at USC, they have had 20 kids exit the program via the transfer portal? They have had 11 come in the door, and they're not done, the biggest of which could still be out there in Caleb Williams. They've added, I want to say, 6 of them this week. They've been on fire, and these are impact players. They got Dye, the running back from Oregon. As I said, Caleb Williams, you're waiting any minute to hear that news. Mario Williams, the wide receiver from Oklahoma. Think about the numbers there. If you add that up, that is 31 kids, both in subtraction and addition. That's half your roster that you've turned over. They're not even to spring practice yet. Sark is doing this right now, transitioning from his first year to his second year at Texas. It's not an overnight rebuild, but it's really not all that far from that. Really, if you think about the quantity, the percentage of your roster that you can turn over. What about LSU? LSU's been killing it here too. LSU has seen 11 guys exit so far. Now, some of these are not committed yet, so technically they could come back. You would think that in all likelihood, if they have exited because a new regime is in place, it's either because they didn't see eye to eye with them or that new regime not so subtly told them, you probably need to look elsewhere. There's probably not going to be a place for you here. So LSU's seen 11 exit or either enter the transfer portal, and then they've had 11 come in the door. And these are impact players too. Now, the benefit when you hire a guy who's got a lot of miles on his tires like Brian Kelly is he's had to do it several ways. There's no guesswork. There's no one way he got there. Brian Kelly's had different teams with different skill sets. He's had different kinds of quarterbacks, different kinds of backfields, different kinds of defenses. And so he, in other words, is able to come in and assess, here's what we have right now. Let's see, I remember 2013 or 2017. That's my most comparable data point for a team at Notre Dame relative to what I have here now. How did we do it then? All right, then you fill in that blank. Then you say, go find me the players that fit the kind of critical factors that we had on that team. He's got Polian in there right now, by the way, who is doing a heck of a job. It's a very underrated hire. I was over on Go 24/7, the board today. A lot of them were talking about that hire. They are right. That's also what a lot of coaches behind the scenes have been talking about. Player personnel has always been important, but because you now have to have a college scouting apparatus attached to your college program, which you didn't need 5 years ago even, it's even more of a big deal. I do not think, as a result of what we're talking about right now, we have seen a peak in coaching salaries. A lot of the behind-the-scenes talk about the coaching world is always who's going where, but it's also who's going to get paid what, and when are these exorbitant coaching salaries, when are they going to crest? Like, when are we going to see that flood stage reach its crest, and then when are the salaries going to start to recede a little bit? When's that bubble going to pop? I don't know. I just don't think it's happened yet. In fact, I think if we're looking on average 3 or 4 years down the road, the average major head coach's salary is probably a little bit more inflated. And if it's not an outright dollar figure, certainly when you count the perks that are built into that contract, it will be more inflated than it is right now. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on a question about Kirby Smart and what his true value should be right now. But if you think about coaching salaries and you want to know if they've peaked or not, or if they're just going to keep skyrocketing, I would lean towards the latter scenario. And I'm going to tell you why. Quite simply put, whether it makes you feel like you need to take a shower or not, no coach has really ever had this kind of leverage until right now. Now, you can look at it that way or not look at it that way, but coaching salaries are going to keep going up because no coach, or collectively no group of coaches, have ever had this kind of leverage. It used to be that if Lincoln Riley left Oklahoma for USC, that's tough, but he's got a rock-solid program there, and we will have very little issue replacing him. Now, they got Brent Venables, they got their guy there, but it used to just be when the coach is out the door, he and his staff are out the door. Now, it can be, if the coach is out the door, the quarterback, best 2 wide receivers, a couple of All-American corners, they could all be out the door. And that, even though it's not meant to be this way, could be the kind of leveraging tool that you've never seen before exist in college football. Is it the way it's intended to work? No, it's not. Is it abusing the system? I'm sure folks in Norman, Oklahoma would say, yes, it is. I've got to tell you now on the back end of this, my opinion is I don't like it. I don't feel great about it. And I also have never been of the opinion that this is going to balance out the sport. I've never been of the opinion that NIL nor will the transfer portal balance out the sport. We're going to talk about it more in just a second. But as I told you before, not here to really litigate my opinion on it. It's kind of an it is what it is sort of scenario to kick off the show tonight. But just think about what Lincoln Riley is showing and what Brian Kelly is showing is possible from a roster standpoint. Now, they haven't played games yet. They haven't even gotten to their first spring practice yet. But that's just my point. Already, you've seen a critical portion of the USC roster get overturned. Ditto. You've seen a critical portion of the LSU roster get overturned. We've never seen anything like this before. There are upsides, there are downsides. It does give you a level of excitement probably if you've got a new staff in the house that you've never had before. And conversely, if you start to hear whispers and rumors that your coach could be on the move to another college program, you're biting your fingernails down to the nub because it could just gut your roster in a moment's notice. And there's really nothing you can do about it because if they choose to leave you, what are you going to do? If there's really no amount of money you could have thrown at him, if he's leaving you regardless, you better hope that there's just an infinitely higher character in him than 99% of coaches out there where he says, you know what, my old roster's off limits. I'm not touching those guys. That's idealistic. Unfortunately, this is a realistic world that we live in.